There is an old saying in my family, "Thou who art undead art chosen." And thine exodus from the undead asylum maketh pilgrimage to the land of ancient lords. When thou ringeth the bell of awakening, the fate of the undead thou shalt know. These are the final words of Oscar, Knight of Astora, who rescues you from the undead asylum. These words are what usher you to the haunted lands of Lordran, a world of undying horror and unrelenting pain. Your quest to decide the fate of the Age of Fire, fighting through each trial Lordran presents, nursing your wounds at each bonfire along the way. It is your choice whether to rekindle the first flame and perpetuate the Age of the Gods, or allow the flame to die, strip them of their power, and embrace the Age of Dark. I'm Tommy Thompson, and to celebrate 10 years of AI in games, it's time to explore the inner workings of one of the most important and influential video games of all time. Welcome to the AI of Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a third-person action role-playing game steeped in dark medieval fantasy and first released in 2011. Players fight against numerous demonic and supernatural creatures, all in a quest to gather souls, the currency of progression and reward of the franchise. Combat is often ruthless and deadly, with a high degree of difficulty. Players' only respite comes from bonfires that appear across the realms of Lordran. While resting at each bonfire, players can replenish their resources and spend souls for upgrades, but upon departure, you will discover that the vast majority of enemies have since respawned to fight once more. Developed by Japanese studio From Software under the codename Project Dark, as the spiritual successor to 2009's Demon Souls, Dark Souls is often considered one of the greatest video games of all time. While its predecessor established many of the core concepts of souls, bonfires, and intense difficulty, plus the ability to lose your accrued souls at the point of death, it is Dark Souls that refined these ideas into a game that has since garnered much critical acclaim, as well as ongoing debate surrounding its impact on the industry. It's a game that defined an entirely new genre, the Souls-like, with many a title inspired by this philosophy, such as Team Ninja's Neo and Deck 13 Interactive's The Surge from 2017, Gunfire Games' Remnant from the Ashes, and Respawn's Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order in 2019. Meanwhile, From Software's own games became their own subgenre, with Demon Souls, the trilogy of Dark Souls titles, Bloodborne, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and Elden Ring, commonly referred to as Soulsbornes. But at the core of all of these games are ruthless and relentless enemy non-player characters. What at first may seem rather rigid and merely aggressive becomes more complex and interesting upon further analysis, a topic I discussed back in 2017 in one of the earliest episodes of my Design Dive series. Enemy NPCs in Dark Souls can prove to be highly versatile. They change weapons based on in-game conditions, heal themselves when possible, embrace the use of magic and other special abilities, and react to the player to capitalize on your mistakes by blocking your attacks or even parrying them. A player's game can be invaded not just by other players, but also NPC phantoms, who are often more ruthless and challenging than the average enemy. Meanwhile, boss battles can feel overwhelmingly difficult to the uninitiated, as you need to learn the right time to block, to dodge, to strike, and to flee. Learning the behavioral patterns of many of the more ruthless enemies of the game is one that takes time, and even then, there is a significant amount of randomness involved. No boss battle plays out the same way twice, and often you can bring in an ally NPC to help you turn the tide in even the most challenging of skirmishes. And so with that in mind, it's time to dig in further. Let's start by getting to grips with the underlying architecture, and critically, how I began to piece all of this together. In order to understand the inner workings of Dark Souls AI, I had to do it the hard way. Dark Souls was developed using From Software's in-house proprietary game engine. While their engine utilizes middleware such as Havok for physics, Fmod for audio, and Bink for video, its core is developed by the studio using the C++ programming language. But on top of this, a lot of additional components are scripted using Lua. This is a rather common practice in AAA games, given the relative ease of use and efficacy of Lua as an embedded scripting platform. In fact, we discussed it briefly back in episode 71 as I explained how the multiplayer bots work in Halo Infinite. Programmers can quickly integrate Lua scripts in a way that is flexible and allows for features to be easily added or removed where necessary. Since Dark Souls' release, a variety of hobbyists have decompiled hundreds of Lua files to allow for mods to be built for Dark Souls, and in some cases cleaned them up to make them more readable. Links are in the description for those wishing to dig into it themselves. These publicly shared decompilations, alongside some of my own research into the engine's operation, not to mention trying to translate it all from Japanese to English, have helped me build an understanding of just what exactly it is that Dark Souls is doing. So let me stress that what follows is my interpretation of how Dark Souls works. I didn't receive any support or assistance from anyone involved in the development of the game to help me reach this conclusion. Perhaps the most exciting aspect of all of this is that I'm only just scratching the surface of this codebase, given From Software have continued to improve and update this engine as the Soulsborne genre has grown in popularity. The same core engine tech was later used for Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and most recently in the 2022 release Elden Ring, though it has naturally seen significant improvements to a myriad of its core functions. The one outlier here is Dark Souls 2 and its reimagining Scholar of the First Sin, which was built using a separate engine that is assumed to have started as a branch of the original Dark Souls engine. However, further examination of its core by modders suggests that it has been heavily modified and rewritten to a point that many core features such as scripting, map editing, character control systems and more are fundamentally different. Meaning that while much of what is explained in this video could still be relevant to future games, and judging from what I've seen already from the fan community's work in decompiling Elden Ring, there is a significant chance that this could be the case, it is most certainly not applicable to Dark Souls 2. So to get started, I want to talk a little bit about the core AI engine and how any and all AI characters in Dark Souls are designed to operate. All characters in Dark Souls at any point in time, be they fodder, allies, merchants, enemies or bosses, are built to recognize, establish and satisfy goals. A goal can vary in its purpose and gameplay complexity. Many of these simplest of goals are ones that players will recognize throughout their time fighting NPCs in Dark Souls. Walking around their local environment awaiting the player, turning to face you, chasing you, and entering combat once in range. Applying a variety of combat moves, only to then retreat and return to the area of the map you first found them if you run far enough away. These are all goals. Even staying in position and standing idle is technically a goal. There are over 300 goals in the base game, plus another 30 introduced for the Artorias of the Abyss DLC, though around 25 of those in the base game appear to be cut content or unused variants of specific NPCs, a point I will return to later. Any Dark Souls character can, at any time, be assigned a new top goal, which becomes their current priority, and it is then their job to resolve them. An NPC can decide whether to continue executing the current goal, or acknowledge success or failure in attempting to complete it and move on. This is a useful feature, given a goal may no longer be relevant to gameplay and should be swapped out. For example, if a character has a specific attack goal to complete, but the player managed to get a hit on them, and in doing so, interrupts them. Some goals are denoted as common and are used by a variety of NPCs, often with their own interpretations of it, while many listed in the codebase are unique to a given character. This process implies the use of a planning system, a topic we've explored many times over the years here on AI in Games. In fact, our very first episode was all about the AI of fear, which used a technique known as goal-oriented action planning that searches for a sequence of actions to satisfy a goal. Each action carries preconditions, which are rules on whether it can be selected based on the current state of the game. Once a plan of actions is built, It then translates the execution of those actions to a finite state machine. But Dark Souls is doing something quite different. Rather, it's operating more akin to a hierarchical planner. A hierarchical planner is built around the idea of a high-level abstract goal, which can be achieved by breaking the problem down into steps that will satisfy some or all of the original goal's intentions, and then those steps can also be broken down further, if necessary. Now, we've seen this in previous episodes of AI in games through use of what is known as an HTN or Hierarchical Task Network Planner, notably episode 14 on Transformers Fall of Cybertron, plus episodes 37 and 38 on Guerrilla's Horizon Zero Dawn. HTN planners solve goals by using one of two types of activities known as tasks: a primitive task, that is simply one specific action in the game with its own preconditions, or a compound task, which is multiple primitive or compound tasks put together, sort of like a macro of good actions in sequence. This is useful in that it allows designers the ability to craft sequences of actions that make sense to glue together, and then declare them as a compound task. So during planning, the system will often start by using compound tasks that would be applicable in the game state, but they're still rather abstract, and then over time it is grounded into something much more thorough and practical, ensuring it's safe to execute at runtime. But Dark Souls AI isn't exactly an HTN planner. It isn't deconstructing compound tasks into primitive actions. It's finding actions to execute while also adding or removing new goals. As mentioned earlier, a character can be assigned a top goal, but it can also have several sub-goals running at the same time. The reason for this is that the top goal for NPCs are often incredibly vague. For example, the Ceaseless Discharge boss only has one unique goal, goal_Tadare525000_battle. In fact, most top goals for a given character roughly say NPC type X goes into combat, but the sub-goals become increasingly specific. So each planning task doesn't just execute actions in the game, it also adds new sub-goals that it must solve after executing the current task, and it will do so by finding a new task it can execute that will address the sub-goal. So for example, an NPC in Dark Souls is in combat and it decides it will execute a dodge or a roll, but it also adds a sub-goal to block and another sub-goal to attack the player. It will then seek to complete the first sub-goal once the dodge is completed, and then pursue the second sub-goal. This allows the NPC to play more strategically when necessary. This also allows for combos of attacks and strategic movements, where each attack adds a new sub-goal to continue the combo. But in execution, the combo might behave slightly differently, depending on what's happening in the current state of the game. And so interestingly, Dark Souls AI appears to adopt ideas from what is known as Hierarchical Goal Network or HGN planning, a technique that, rather than decomposing abstract tasks into concrete actions, it decomposes goals into sub-goals and finds the correct actions to apply along the way. It's very similar, but the Dark Souls execution is slightly different. Given it doesn't decompose goals into sub-goals, it just keeps adding or removing new goals based on the game state and the NPC's performance. Interestingly, HGN planning is, to my knowledge, seldom used in games. In fact, the only other game I know of that uses it, Ara History Untold, is a 4X game that is being released later this year in 2024. Though if anyone else knows of examples of this, do let me know in the comments. From my perspective, what is perhaps the most interesting aspect of this is that Dark Souls was released in 2011, and while HTN planners have existed since around 1995, the earliest published academic research in HGN planners dates back to around 2012 or just prior. So, in practice, for an NPC to resolve any and all goals provided, it will look for an action contained within its script files that can resolve it, all the while monitoring progress on its goals in context of the game state. An NPC may remove a sub-goal or even the top goal, given it may no longer be valid. So, referring back to my dodging enemy, it might block and then abandon the sub-goal for the follow-up attack because the player ran away and the attack isn't worth attempting. Alternatively, something in the game world may interrupt the goal. When this occurs, it will then assign itself a new goal. All of this is happening very quickly, with goals being added and removed frequently throughout play. And we'll dig a little more into some specific examples in a moment. But the key thing to appreciate is that at all times, all enemies have a goal to satisfy. and for most, the only way to truly achieve it is to kill you. So, while each NPC is constantly adding, removing, and resolving sub-goals, there's one other aspect of this process that we need to discuss, given it's the one part of this codebase that makes Dark Souls AI so demanding to fight against. Thus far, everything I've described sounds rather straightforward. It adds new goals, it finds actions that can satisfy those goals, and continues in a loop. Sure, that's more or less it in a nutshell. But if that were the case, surely their behaviour would become increasingly predictable. Even if you provided dozens of different actions, if all it is doing is simply finding a task that satisfies the current goal and then applying an action and in turn new sub-goals, then over time it would all become really obvious as to what it's doing in any circumstance. But this isn't reflective of how Dark Souls plays. While many of the enemies are quite predictable, others take much more time to understand. Despite most enemies, even bosses, only having a handful of attacks, it can often be difficult to learn attack patterns, given there is little consistency. An enemy may approach and start combat using one attack in one instance, and then a different one the next time. When players are in a standoff waiting for an opportunity, it can still prove rather difficult to predict, even with hours of experience playing the game. So what's going on here? Each NPC has multiple behaviours it can execute in the codebase. Some are common functions for types of attack, while others are more complex, and both tell the system which actions to execute and possibly add or remove goals. But in many of these behavioural functions, the AI does three really interesting things. First up, a lot of actions and goals are highly sensitive to the current state of the game. Secondly, many actions and sub-goals are reliant simply on a probability achieved using a random number generator. So for example, a combo attack might use different variations between steps or end prematurely purely because of a roll of the dice. And lastly, when multiple actions are valid in a given state and it doesn't know what to do, the game builds a probability distribution across them and selects one of them randomly. This is Dark Souls' real secret. When it has several valid options to pick from, it selects one action at random. But the randomness is finely tuned by designers. To understand this better, let's look at an example. Let's take a look at what is perhaps my favourite boss battle of Dark Souls. Great Grey Wolf Sif, who guards the gravestone of their former master, Knight Artorias, the Abyss Walker. I mean, it's a wolf wielding a sword, that's pretty fucking metal. Sif has 5 main attacks: a horizontal swing of the sword, a 360-degree sword spin, an overhead swing where she gets on her back paws, a backflip to gain some distance, and a charge attack, which is not used all that often during combat. If we take these 5 actions that Sif has available, we could just pick one of these actions at random, assuming they all satisfy the same goal, which for the sake of this example, we'll assume they all do. If we were to pick them randomly, this would give each action a 20% chance to activate, totaling up to 100%. Let's visualize this in what I will now call our combat wheel. Each action has an equal chance of execution, given they have an equal-sized chunk of the wheel. We then spin the wheel and select the action the arrow rests on. This is a simple version of random selection, where each action has an equal share of the probability distribution. But Dark Souls' combat wheel is quite different. Rather than splitting the wheel such that each action has an equal chance of success, the probability distribution means that some actions have more chance than others of being selected. So, for example, if the player is within a certain attack range, it picks a probability distribution where Action 1 now has a 45% chance of being activated, Action 2 has a 40% chance, and the rest only have 5% each. It still totals up to 100, but the weighting on actions is now rather different. As you can see in the diagram, the first 2 actions take up a much larger proportion of the wheel than the remaining 3, given they only have 15% of the space in total. The game then spins the wheel, and wherever the arrow lands, that's the action it will select. But the reason this works so well in practice is that the probability distributions are constantly changing. Every time an NPC makes a decision on what action to take, it builds a new probability distribution based on what's happening in the game. This includes things like how far away the player is, whether they're in range of a specific type of attack, if an item was recently used by the player, whether the odds of breaking the player's guard has increased, the current phase of the combat, and much, much more. So the roulette wheel is constantly changing as actions get a bigger or smaller slice of the pie, or sometimes they are removed entirely because in the current moment they're no longer relevant. It means that an NPC can technically run the same behaviour 3 times in a row, but given the randomness of the combat wheel, it plays out differently every time. All of these probability distributions have been manually tuned by the game designers. This means 2 things in practice. First, that they have worked out how and when certain actions are valid while ensuring they're not repetitive. But more importantly for players, it means that you can still implicitly learn the behaviours of these characters. They're not purely random. Instead, their randomness is carefully constructed. This is evident not just in how the community have successfully documented the behaviours of these characters, but how the very best Dark Souls players don't struggle against these bosses, given they have trained themselves to learn these probability distributions implicitly. This is perhaps most evident when we see players then force the AI to behave in a specific way almost every time, effectively cheesing a boss battle in a way that suits their playstyle. Given how complex a lot of these combat definitions are for each of the bosses, this is actually pretty hard to pull off. But a good example of this is the aforementioned Ceaseless Discharge boss in the Demon Ruins. The Ceaseless Discharge has 4 main attacks: an overhead melee attack, a surge of attacks using his spider-like limbs, a sideways slash with his arms, and lastly a fire ability that is devastating if caught in its wake. Plus of course, it has a lot of other basic actions, such as movement, approaching the player, turning around, and simply waiting. Now the key part is that the boss's combat wheel selection only really factors whether the player is within certain target regions of the map and the overall distance of the player to the enemy, but it doesn't factor in the elevation of the player and whether they are higher or lower than they were before. This is what allows for what is known as the stair melee method, where players refrain from going all the way into the combat area and instead kite the boss around the stairs near the entrance so that it will try to attack them at the top, and then they run to the bottom before it can connect, making it much easier to dodge and allowing them to get a couple of hits in. This wheel concept does have some overlap with the notion of utility AI, which we've explored over in my AI 101 series. Utility AI is great for determining the value of an action or goal in the current context, so in Dark Souls it's worth thinking of it as a utility calculation that gives the probability of each action being selected for the next spin of the combat wheel. Okay, the big technical part of this video is now concluded, so let's explore a little more of the underlying design of the game and how enemies and other NPCs are built to exploit the framework I've now described. Every single NPC that spawns into the map in Dark Souls has some kind of behaviour script and goals attached to it. This goes far beyond just the bosses and regular enemies, but the phantoms that players can spawn in, as well as the shop vendors, like Domno of Zena in the Depths, and other allies such as Solaire of Astora in the Undead Parish, or Siegmeyer of Katarina, who you will meet outside Sen's fortress. The vast majority of NPCs will spawn in with the intent to eventually enter combat. Unless it's a boss battle or similar confrontation, NPCs always spawn with their top goal being to simply wait around for the player. They do this either by patrolling an area, standing idle, or run some sort of base animation. They're constantly trying to identify new threats, and will react to their presence by engaging their combat goal. They will then fight the player, using the mechanisms I've already described, and also know when, if at all, to back out of a fight. This also applies to the more friendly NPCs, who will transition into a combat mode if given reason. In fact, all of them have their own combat scripts in the codebase. I found dozens of them. But there are also 2 other modes in which an NPC will spawn. The first is what is largely considered as a spectator or audience. They spawn into the map but are not built to participate in combat or be involved in core gameplay. Their goal is to simply run a simple animation or behaviour. They are NPCs that are typically set dressing within the game. A good example of these are the hollows you find near the broken altar to the Sunlight Covenant in the Undead Parish, and also on the outskirts of New Londo. These characters can be killed, but don't react to the player in any meaningful way. The final NPC category I discovered is what is known as an entourage type. These are NPCs that spawn alongside others and are often subservient to them, and will defer to their leader when they wish to attack the player. That said, I can't speak with confidence in how this is applied in specific contexts. It is worth stressing that the Dark Souls community have noted there are small but notable improvements in the AI between the original Dark Souls and the remastered edition from 2018. Pathfinding is improved, particularly in key areas where enemies were more prone to fall to their deaths, given they blindly follow the pathing provided, notably in the likes of the Tomb of the Giants. Meanwhile, attack timings for certain enemies, aggro distances and coordination has improved as well. Most of this is no doubt a result of modifying the parameters of behaviours that were already established. Plus, it appears that From Software made changes to address obvious flaws and exploits, all while maintaining the mystery for players as they revisit Lordran all over again. It's also worth mentioning how NPC zoning works. Every non-player character is aware of their local vicinity, or more critically their home location, the point where they spawn in according to the level data. The home location is useful, both for ensuring a character spawns in the right place, but also that it knows where to return to in the event it is led astray by the player, only to then leave combat. This home location is required to ensure that every enemy spawns where it should, not just for your first visit, but every subsequent visit to the area after you rest at a bonfire. Visiting bonfires resets all regions of the map so that enemies will spawn in fresh at their home location. The one exception to this is when you leave an area and then revisit it without going to a bonfire. The game only holds in memory the information needed for the active area of the map that players are exploring, and this is often broken down into sub-areas too. This is evident if you look across to a distant area only to notice that there are no enemies or items spawned in. So when the player visits a given location, it loads in all of the enemies, friendly NPCs and items back into memory again. This makes sense given we want to only maintain information relevant to the player's current activity. Keeping NPCs in memory from over in Anor Londo while you're wandering around Blighttown is a tremendous waste of resources and would ultimately affect performance, an issue that Blighttown already suffered from heavily in the original release of the game. This process of loading in enemies on the map is actually the root of a quirky behaviour in NPCs that seasoned players will have spotted. As stated, if you have visited a bonfire prior to your visit to a map region, enemies spawn at their home location. However, if you left the area and returned to it without going to a bonfire, all dead enemies will appear in the position that you killed them. But when a character is spawned in dead, it does so standing up in its idle position, and then the ragdoll physics kick in. As such, you may have spotted that as you turn a corner and spot a dead enemy, it flops into position, and that's because it effectively died all over again. Of course, not all enemies respawn after death. Many bosses, such as the Butcher in the Depths, or the Black Knights in the Undead Burg and Undead Parish, have a disable respawn flag set in their parameters to prevent them from ever reappearing in your current playthrough. This means that after death, they never get reset to their home location, regardless of how many times the player visits a bonfire. However, unlike regular NPCs, those enemies disappear entirely on death and their bodies never respawn. So while you don't see them, know that you're walking through these characters every time you wander past the point where you actually killed them. One last thing to dig into is that while you will find many a character type throughout the world of Dark Souls, they're often broken down into much more specific classes or variants in the actual codebase. Each variant maintains a whole range of different parameters for attack ranges, whether they respond to visual or audio cues, how far they will leave their home location, and much more. If we consider the Undead Burg, one of the first areas of Lordran players should visit after completing the tutorial in the Undead Asylum, it is home to numerous hollow soldiers. But they're not all the same design. There are numerous variants that wield axes, throw firebombs, fire crossbows, or carry spears and shields. Plus there is a single Black Knight, and it ends with you facing the second boss battle of the game, the Taurus Demon. So let's walk through this area, and in doing so I'm going to share more of the underlying AI design of Dark Souls as we go. As we enter the Undead Burg by reaching the top of the stairwell, we find two hollow soldiers immediately in front of us. One is wielding a sword and shield, the other an axe. Now while these are all more or less the same character, they're all hollow soldiers after all, they are technically distinct and separate AI characters in the codebase. Each variant has its own behaviour script, handling how that character should perform, and it's largely based on the weapons they have equipped. So while these first enemies look virtually identical, it's important to acknowledge that these variants and many others we're about to meet are technically unique AI characters in the back end. Both are rather simple in behaviour and attack based largely on proximity and whether they have seen the player. Further ahead are two more enemies. The third NPC is across the short wooden bridge and throws firebombs at a distance. Again, another variant. This one, however, may react to any noise or commotion it hears. Some enemies are flagged to respond to nearby noises within a certain range, regardless of whether they see you. This enables them to appear and catch you off guard, an idea we saw as far back as 1993 in my episode on the AI of Doom. Meanwhile, the fourth enemy is off to the left of the bridge, and is the same variant as the first, but will only react once it achieves visual confirmation. So already in the opening moments of the area, we have three variants that each behave slightly differently in attack patterns and how they react to the player's presence. Moving up towards the bonfire, we have more variants, notably the crossbow-wielding Hollow who reacts to your presence first and continues to shoot from a distance, never once leaving their perch. Meanwhile, three more enemies appear between you and the crossbow enemy. Note that the sword and shield enemies move towards you when spotted, even though when in hiding, and can attack either with light or strong attacks, as well as combos. As mentioned previously, combos are actions that immediately have a sub-goal added that say to continue the combo, with the final sub-goal of attacking using a combo closing attack, like as shown. Meanwhile, to the right, before we head to the bonfire, is a new variant that wields spears and heavy shields. These play more conservatively. They are not aggroed lest approached, and prefer to wait long periods to attack, and often try to maintain distance from the player where possible. After passing the bonfire, there is only one new variant that is introduced, a Hollow wielding a sword and even larger shield, which can alternate between short 2-attack combos or larger attacks. The rest of the Undead Burg in the build-up to the Taurus Demon utilises each of these enemies to its benefit, with the firebomb wielders attacking us across the short bridge right after the bonfire, but only coming to fight you later if they are provoked. Meanwhile, another crossbow wielder hides in the tower to catch you off guard, and more shielded enemies towards the end challenge your ability to break their poise. The enemies faced in the Undead Burg are rather simple, which is to be expected given it's one of the game's first areas. They seldom exploit the ability to block or parry, at least on the normal difficulty, and many of them can't heal themselves either. But this combination alone is often enough to make a first-time visitor of Lordran be more wary of how to approach combat in future. And so, as I begin to bring this episode to a close, there's one final thing to do. And that's a quick speed round of all the other little facts that I just couldn't figure out where to put into the script. Let's fucking go! First up, in the codebase, the weapon slots are encoded based on the PlayStation control scheme. They are actually identified as L1, R1, L2 and R2. Whether this is a relic from developing Demon's Souls as a PlayStation 3 exclusive, or simply it being the primary platform during development, is open to debate. Speaking of equipment slots, enemies use items as attacks. They treat the usage of an item as a common attack, albeit without any target or distance requirements. So yeah, be on the lookout for enemies that attack you by drinking from their Estus flasks. In fact, using items are non-interruptible goals, which is why attacking an enemy while they drink an Estus flask or cast a heal miracle is super handy. Interestingly, even the crystal lizards, you know, those wee critters that drop titanite when you kill them, are tied into the AI system. When its battle script is activated, it has one goal: leave target. So they just keep trying to run away from you until they've succeeded. Actually reminds me of the rats in Fear now that I think about it. The cut goals from the original game suggest that the Black Iron Tarkus, an NPC white phantom you can summon at Sen's Fortress, may have originally appeared later in the game as a red phantom in either Anor Londo or Lost Izalith. This deviates from the established lore, where his body and armour can be found in Anor Londo, mere feet away from the entrance to the painted world of Ariamis. Reading through the logic, it suggests multiple Black Knights were also cut from the game, which is maybe a good thing? Those guys are pretty nasty sometimes. The combat wheel I described doesn't just influence the selection of attacks, sometimes the wheel is used for different ways to run the same type of attack, only changing its parameters. I found, when looking through the AI scripts of the mimics, that they can run the same attack in 5 different ways, with different values for attack distance, approach distance, dash distance, and the odds of their poise being broken. As mentioned earlier, there are separate logic scripts for the different Hollow variants in the Undead Parish. I found numerous versions of this pattern appear elsewhere, notably for the Balder Knights in Sen's Fortress and the White Knights in Anor Londo. But also, this practice is used to allow for different buffs and even different behaviours depending on location. So for example, the snow rats in the painted world of Ariamis have a separate configuration from the small rats you encounter in the Undead Parish and the Depths, even though their behaviour is identical. This separate config allows the snow rats to deliver toxic buildup instead of poison. Meanwhile, the large and giant undead rats in the Depths have entirely unique behaviour configurations. The one exception to this rule, based on my understanding of the logic, are the Titanite demons, which all behave the exact same way when they appear in Darkroot Garden, Sen's Fortress, Anor Londo, the Catacombs, and Lost Izalith. And lastly, named NPCs have different configurations based on where they appear in the game and how you interact with them. So for example, Solaire of Astora has two different sets of behaviour logic, one for if you attack him while he's chilling out in the open world, and another for when he's called in as a supporting phantom. I found similar logic for Knight Lautrec as well, plus virtually every passive NPC that you can attack in the game will have their own corresponding combat logic, be it Oswald of Karim, Griggs of Vinheim, Havel the Rock, and even Rhea of Thorland and Quilana of Izalith. The AI of Dark Souls is a curious beast. What may seem simple, bordering on random in its composition from the outside, hides something with mercurial complexity. It's safe to say that I have only scratched the surface of this, and I could spend hours digging into the minutiae of each boss, but I felt that this video should provide an accessible, high-level overview of what is really happening inside the Soulsborne AI architecture. This episode has been a real labour of love for me, an idea that I started working on as far back as late 2018, writing little bits of it here and there as I pulled together every scrap of information I could find, all until it finally reached a point in early 2024 that I could then write it all into something coherent and hopefully fun to watch. A big thank you for your patience. It's been a little while since we've had an episode of AI in Games here on the channel, but also a big thank you to the continued work of the Dark Souls modding community, some of whom reached out and shared what they were doing. And of course, a big thank you to my crowdfunding supporters on Patreon, YouTube and Substack that allowed for me to spend hours of my time conducting the research needed for this video. Longtime viewers will know that Dark Souls has held my interest for many years prior to now, and was the subject of not one but two episodes of my Design Dive series, looking at how the design of the game promotes a particular philosophy towards player engagement and education. Links to the episodes on Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, are in the video description, with the next entry of this analysis focused on Bloodborne coming soon. And with that, I'll bid you all farewell. Goodbye, be safe my friends, and don't you dare go hollow.